Welcome to another Manitowish Waters Historical Society interview. This time, Historical Society member Kay Krans interviews Delp Schafer. Delp Schafer and his parents started vacationing in Manitowish Waters in the early 50s, staying at Little Bohemia. Much later in life, Delp purchased one of the all-season Walter Meinel cabins as his retirement home. He spent many summers with the Meinels and tells about their resort and their history. This interview was recorded June 28, 2021.
Delp Schafer, born in January 3rd, 1947.
And when did you start coming up north?
Probably the early 50s.
Okay, so you were a tiny child as...
Right. We stayed at Little Bohemia in their little cabins around the lodge, and then when he quit doing that, then we moved over to Teney's and Voss's.
Well, tell me about, do you know about what year that Bohemia stopped renting the cottages?
Probably the 52, 53, I would think.
Okay.
Because my father died in 1955.
Oh,
and
sorry.
so we were over at Teney's at that time. I think we stayed over there 2-3 years.
Okay.
Over there. So it had to be the early 50s he quit the little
Okay.
cabins. I think there's one left on the shore. Emil Jr. moved it down to his home down the shore, and that was his guest cabin.
Okay. Okay.
So there is one or two left.
Uh-huh. Do you have any memories about staying at
Oh,
Little
sure.
Bo?
I can remember Emil Sr. He was like P.T. Barnum. He'd entertain all his customers. He knew all his customers. After everybody had dinner, he'd give the Dillinger story. And as a kid, I memorized it. I knew that story better than he did at the end. And he looked at his customers, and if he saw that the weather was bad or they were getting a little, he'd bring out free hors d'oeuvres and stuff. He was definitely P.T. Barnum. He kept all his customers entertained.
Well, tell me any memories you have of that, because I think that's a really important story.
Well, that's about all, but I mean, he gave out sweatshirts. I still have a postcard where he signed it and gave his autograph and that kind of stuff, and he was a real showman.
He was a showman, and it sounds like hospitality was important to him.
Yes, because you all stayed there and everybody went to dinner there. It was an American plan, but everybody ended up for dinner there, so he knew his crowd, and he knew when people were going to leave or bored or something like that, and then all of a sudden he'd tell a story or bring in hors d'oeuvres or whatever. I knew the card checks.
Okay, tell me
Marie was the cook. Steve, her husband, was the bartender. And I don't think my mother ever left Little Bohemia without going out to the kitchen and saying hello to Marie. And I'm kind of the same age, I think, as Mary Beth Klarchek.
Uh-huh.
So I remember her. We kind of all grew up around here during the summer and stuff and whatever. So,
do you remember any foods at Little Bo at that time that were special?
Oh, sure. They never opened up Little Bohemia without duck.
Okay.
And that's Czech, not German.
Uh-huh.
So they made it the Czech style with the caraway
Uh-huh.
on top. And also Marie's liver dumpling soup was famous.
Yeah.
And the prime rib, of course. And back then, lobster wasn't expensive. They had lobster on the menu.
Uh-huh.
In fact, I think there's still an old menu roaming around Little Bohemia somewhere. It's on a big cardboard thing with red letters.
Oh,
Yeah.
Cool.
But the food was good. I mean, the food around here, as well as the fishing, the food was known.
Okay.
You know, there was a lot of good restaurants, Voss's. And
Did you stay at Voss's directly after Little Bohemia?
well, sometimes we come up here for a 2-week summer vacation. My dad would come up here fishing and hunting, and then he'd bring the whole family up for a summer vacation. And if Little Bohemia was booked and we couldn't stay the entire 2 weeks, sometimes we'd stay a few days over at Voss's.
Okay. What do you remember about Voss's?
You know, elegant dining and basically, you know, another huge place like Little Bohemia, well known, whatever. Of course, Little Bohemia had the Dillinger story. I mean, that was famous all over the place.
Is there anything particular you remember about the Dillinger situation there, or the museum? Do you remember the museum?
Oh yes, I was in that museum as a kid all the time. Like I said before, I knew he'd get up there at the end of everybody eating dinner and tell that story, and I could tell if he missed a couple lines because I had heard so often. Then he had all the newspaper clippings
Yeah.
when he walked in the door, and I swear to God, I read all those, a million times and whatever. I was mesmerized by that story, and so is everybody else. I mean, it
Right.
made the place world famous,
It did.
Yeah.
And people still want to hear the story.
right, and the bullet holes and whatever, and everybody accused Emil of shooting more bullet holes in every winter because they figured there was more of them there.
Right.
But back in those days, everybody knew each other or recognized everybody, and like I said before, that was the place to eat on a Saturday night.
It's Little Bohemia.
Yeah. As well when Junior had it, his son.
So after you stayed at Voss's, then you began to move to stay where?
Teney's.
Okay, and what can you tell us about the Teney family?
I think he was a carpenter contractor. He lived above his workshop, and his main home was out near 51, and then he built 2 cabins.
Down on the Rest Lake.
Down on Rest Lake.
Okay. What were the cabins that you stayed in like there?
They were light housekeeping, like
Uh-huh.
2 bedrooms, kitchen, whatever. Back as it got into the 50s, it got to be a set American plan, more light housekeeping, and then the restaurants turned into pay as you go.
Okay.
So
it moved from American plan into more
right, I think
independent
the 50s
cooking.
had moved more into light housekeeping.
Yeah. And so the cottage had 2 bedrooms, a small kitchen,
Living room.
and did it have front porches?
I do not remember that.
Okay.
And but now light housekeeping, I mean, everybody had like maybe breakfast and lunch, but like my mother would say, she came up here for 2 weeks and she didn't cook dinner. We
Okay.
went out every night, and most people did go out every night for
Okay.
dinner, and that was the entertainment, to go out.
Now, did Mr. Teney have a wife?
Yes.
Okay. Do you remember anything about their personalities or?
Very nice people. I mean, if you stayed there more than once, these owners became friends. And I still think I have a postcard of one of the cabins with her writing something to my mother after my father died and whatever, and they all became friends. We knew the Tylackers, Minnie and Carl, who owned Rustic Roadhouse, started that, the grocery store, the tackle box. In fact, that's how we got to Meinel's.
Okay.
We came up here after my father died, and after a wedding, and stopped in at the Tylackers' home, and he said to my mother, "Eleanor, I got the perfect place for you and your son. You could handle it. It's Meinel's Honeymoon Cottage." And so we went over there, and my mother bought it in 1963.
Wonderful. So you stayed there from the 50s on and then ended up buying the cabin?
Well, we had a pause there from 1955 till the 60s when my father died. We were
Okay.
about to buy a place when my father died.
Okay.
And then we had a lapse there. We went to a wedding, family wedding, drove through town, stopped at the Tylackers. The Tylackers sent us over to the Meinels. Now, we never had stayed at the resort.
Oh, okay.
So the first time we drove in there was the first time we really knew the Meinels.
Okay. Now tell me about your father. What happened?
Well, he died at 46 of cancer of the colon.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
That must have been really hard for your mom and you.
So we didn't probably get up here again for about 8 years.
Okay, so there was an 8-year pause.
Yeah.
Now tell me what you remember about Tylacker.
They were just like everybody else, husband and wife, worked unbelievably hard and long hours, and they knew their customers. If you went in there enough, they knew you and you knew them, and they became friends. So it wasn't like customer-owner relationship, it was almost like friends. came up here every summer and you met your friends again, you know.
So again, it sounds like hospitality was just huge.
And fishing was the main thing up here. That was the entertainment. Was everything was geared to fishing. And I can remember when my mother bought that 63, most boats on the chain were a 14-foot Alumacraft with a 5 or 10 horsepower motor. Couple of people had runabouts with maybe an 80 horsepower motor on it. And there were very few of those, and everybody fished.
So it was a fishing culture.
Yeah, right.
And a tourist, but tourism was more than just tourism. It was getting to know your customers and.
Yeah, hospitality was huge.
Yeah.
You know, and if they liked you, they invited you back, and if they didn't like you, well, you were no longer at their resort. You know, and they had a steady clientele. I'll bet most of these resorts had the same people coming back year after year after year. In fact, the ones that bought Meinel's cabins over on Russ Lake probably stayed at their first resort over in Winchester, and then came to Russ Lake, and then eventually bought the places.
Very nice.
Yeah.
Now, I just want one more question about if you remember Teney's first names.
I do not.
Okay. All right. Well, let's go.
But I do know one
Yeah.
of their relatives who was coming up here the 4th.
Oh.
Yeah, she was, the Teneys were, that was her aunt.
Okay. Well, maybe we can get some information from her.
Yeah, she'll be up on the 4th.
Okay. So let's go over towards the Meinels now. Walter and Clara.
Right.
Okay, and tell me your story about Walter and Clara.
Well, they came from Germany, and he was sponsored into the country from his uncle in Warsaw. And in Germany, he sold all over in South America, all over Europe. He sold shoemaking equipment
Okay.
from Germany. Then probably around World War I, he must have got into the States from his uncle sponsoring him. And then he went to technical school in Milwaukee for carpentry and cabinet making. And that's where he met Clara in Milwaukee. She was hostess of the Wisconsin Club,
Wow.
which is still there.
Yes.
And that's where they got most of their clientele, was from the Wisconsin Club, her being hostess. And they started the resort in Winchester, South Turtle Lake. And it was American plan. They had 18 guides going out of there.
Wow.
And then they averaged about 3 hours. She told me they averaged about 3 hours of sleep a night during the season. They had 8 cabins.
In Winchester.
Some of them were big, some of them were smaller, or whatever. And then the main lodge, it was kind of like a Voss's. And their health deteriorated after X amount of years. And that's why they went down on W and came to Russ Lake. And they built like a boarding house.
Okay.
And had little bedrooms upstairs. And that's where they put the fishermen and old customers. And that was on a 100-foot government lot. And then they bought the other government lots to the south, and they built permanent 4-season homes on these lots.
Okay.
Another 3 of them. And they were like 2-bedroom, 1 bath, kitchen, living room, with basements. And that was about in late 40s.
That was unusual.
Unheard of. Unheard of. I mean, central heat, the whole ball of wax, you know. And they rented them out by the week, by the season. In fact, I remember one of them, a school teacher, lived in there year-round.
Do you remember the school teacher's name?
No, I do not. And then he, the next lot down, a Finlander lived on, and he had like a tar paper shack and a sauna. And instead of saying good morning, he always came out the door and said wahoo. So Clara and Jim Erickson, who lived to the north of them, they're the ones that named the road Wahoo Road. And it's still Wahoo Road.
Very interesting.
So when the Finlander died, they bought that lot turned the tar paper shack into the honeymoon cabin, which my mother bought, sold the boarding house to the Berglunds, and then built another house in back of the honeymoon cabin, and that was their final house in which until the day they died. And he died, and he went fishing every day until the day he died. I mean, he was a big musky fisherman. Some of those pictures, he trolled almost every night because he had heart problems and he wasn't supposed to cast. And he'd still bring them in and whatever, and then if he caught a real big one, he had a big locomotive bell beside the house, and he'd ring the bell and the whole neighborhood would come over and admire the fish.
Oh, that's very cool.
And I used to take him out a lot and drive his truck and put the boat in and out of the water because of his heart problems. So I got the professional guide showing me around all over the area. And he was in different books. I remember taking books out in the library in Whitefish Bay, and he was in the books as a prominent guide in the North Woods around Manitowish Waters. And then eventually they sold off the homes in their retirement. That was kind of the retirement deal. And then during the winter, they also went down to Mazatlan, Mexico, where he duck hunted, Mexican wood ducks. And she'd can the breasts and bring them back to Manitowish Waters and cook them up during the summer. And he wanted to, retire, so he sold them off. My mother was the second last one, and then the one north of me was the last one to go. And then he died in 1971. She died about 5 years later. And then the home was given to an heir to the uncle who sponsored him in the country, because he was so grateful for that uncle sponsoring him into the country that he wanted to reward the family somehow. So he left his estate, Clara and Walter's estate, to this relative. I think it was a nephew down in Wausau. And they're buried in the Pine Lawn Cemetery.
Okay.
They have a tombstone that reads the Meinels, just like was their letterhead.
Oh,
and
nice.
On their advertisements.
Uh-huh.
And that's about it. And then I bought their home 3 years later. It was sold to Murphy from Murphy's Point, Rest Lake.
Okay.
And he was married to a Hayes. And I don't know if she still has Teney's house over here on 51. She came back and bought that house. She had two daughters. Mm-hmm. And about 3 years later, after I bought it from them. So I have the house back, and then made it into one lot and used the little cabin as a guest house.
So the last house that the Meinels built was the house you own?
Yeah, and naturally I inherited the little cabin from my mother.
Uh-huh, uh-huh. So, Walter and Clara, do you remember their cooking, or did you ever eat with them?
Or? Oh yeah, they had us up all the time. She'd make stuffed muskie. She had a special stuffing, a small muskie. She'd stuff and bake. She was good at the mushrooms. She'd fry and bread.
So she collect wild mushrooms?
Correct. And she always checked them out herself, and she always told me the story. Except one time at the first resort up in Winchester, she didn't check it out, the mushrooms. And her and a couple waitresses ended up down at the hospital down here getting their stomachs pumped because one of the mushrooms were bad. Uh-huh. But she said, I always checked them. And she was an excellent cook, like most people up here were, you know. She had the American plan, and where they cooked all those meals, homemade bread, everything was homemade. They had a bar that they ran till 2, 3 in the morning. That's why they only averaged 3 hours of sleep.
And that's while they were in Winchester?
Yeah.
I've read where they owned that Winchester resort for like 20 years before they moved down here.
Right. 18 guys. Their health, it finally got to their health.
Uh-huh.
I think he had some heart attacks. She, I guess, almost had a nervous breakdown. You just can't keep going like that.
Right.
I mean, there's even in their brochure that she made maple syrup for the pancakes in the spring of the year, you know, and they built all those places.
By themselves.
Yeah, unbelievable amount of work, you know. And then the people would come up on, like, you know, on the trains. They'd pick them up at Manitowish, at the train depot, or down Minocqua, and then bring them up to the lodge.
I believe that Mr. Meinel was also involved in working with the fish hatchery at one point.
He could have been. I do not know that
nothing
story.
about that.
Yeah.
Okay. And Clara was born in the United States, or?
No, she was also from Germany, but I do not know her history.
Okay.
I just know that Walter sold shoemaking equipment all over the world. And during the war, then he
Came here
during the First World War, and that's where a lot of Germans weren't liked that well.
Right.
From World War I. In fact, he told me he used to pretend that he was Portuguese. Because, you know, in Europe they knew a lot of languages. I mean, you knew Portuguese, Spanish, German, English. So he pretended he was Portuguese, so he wouldn't be, you know, because a lot of people were death against the Germans.
During World War I, there was
Yeah.
a lot of anti-German.
Yeah.
So maybe that's one of the reasons they settled up here. Where?
There was a lot of Germans settled up here. I mean, the Tylackers were German. Well, the Wanetkas were Czechs. Vosses, I think, were German, weren't they? I don't know for sure. I'd have to read her book again.
Yeah.
Which is excellent, by the way.
Right. Ruthie's book is Lunch
on-
at Boney's Mound.
Excellent book.
Ruthie Gardner, yeah, very
She's
good.
very
book.
talented.
Yeah. What do you remember about their personality? Well, now you bought the place in '63, so they're elderly.
My mother did.
Your mother did, but they're elderly by this time, or?
Yeah, they were like, they got to be like grandparents I never had.
Oh, okay.
You know, I mean, we'd, you know, go out for fish fries. They'd invite us up. Her and Walter were constantly down at the lake, sitting in the chairs talking to us or whatever. And they were like grandparents. I had stuff in their garage and stored for the winter. And like I said before, I drove them around in his truck with his heart problems and stuff like that. They were like grandparents.
That's wonderful.
In fact, I was graduated from dental school. I was supposed to drive him down to Mexico because I had graduated and was waiting for my place to be done in the fall. And it wasn't done. I was supposed to drive him down, and then we got another. I couldn't do it, and I think the one that delivered Standard Oil drove him down, and he died in Texas. He never made it to Mexico that year in 1971. He died in Texas with a heart attack. And then they came
So they
back.
were en route to Mexico.
Right. And I think I still remember when we left that summer, because that was my eternal summer after dental school. I was up here the whole summer waiting for my place to be done. And all I did was hunt and fish, and Walter and I went out, and when we left, he was sitting in the window, and he had tears in his eyes because I was leaving. And I think he knew that he was deteriorating, but who knows, you know. But it was my eternal summer.
And they didn't have children, so you really were important to them, probably.
Well, whatever. You know, everybody in those days, you got really friendly with your neighbors and
Right.
whatever. In fact, some of my friends are up here. The Stowers family, best friend from grade school. He owns a place on Manitowish, and his two nephews. One bought some of the Voss property, another one married a Fire Eisen, and they still have the place over on the north end of Rest Lake, which is another resort. And then my next door neighbor, the Puccinellis, they own a place across Rest Lake, so everybody kind of came up here
Yeah,
sooner or later.
right.
But,
Once you get it in your blood, it's like, wow, I want to be up north.
But it was like, you know, really close knit years ago. I mean, there wasn't that many people, and you really got friendly with people.
So when you would help Walter with his motors, and you went fishing with him, he taught you how to musky fish.
Yeah, and walleyes.
Walleyes, okay.
and he loved fishing. He'd catch a walleye, and it was like the first catch he ever caught. And if I missed one, wouldn't hook it, he'd start screaming in German that I missed that fish, you know. And he was a true fisherman. It was in his blood. And he went out every day. He followed that book, that moon cycle book that used to come out, where the lesser and greater feeding times according to the moon. And he followed that book like a Bible. And he swore by it, but he only went out at those times.
So who knows what he would have done at other times.
I don't even think I don't know if they make that book anymore.
I don't know.
Yeah, he used to have it in all the tackle boxes.
Uh-huh.
And then, you know, we always bought minnows, some rod and reel, you know, and whatever. Everybody got to know everybody.
You and I would have been in the same time period. I lived on Alder Lake.
Okay.
And my family came in the late 40s, but it was a great time. It was special.
Yeah.
The tackle box, the rod and reel.
My dad spent every rainy day. My dad spent hours in that tackle box, and he always had to buy tackle. I still got some of it. You know, there was always a new one that was better than the old one he just bought the day before, but whatever. And then she sold moccasins and gloves and all deerskin.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Always had to have a pair of moccasins every summer.
Right.
So your dad was a fisherman and hunter, and how you found out about.
Right. He came up here probably because of the Dillinger story, and then they stayed at Little Bohemia, and they got friendly with Emil Wanatka Sr., and then they came up here hunting and deer hunting, fishing, and then he brought the whole family up for the summer vacation.
And you said you grew up in Whitefish Bay?
Whitefish Bay, yeah, north of Milwaukee.
Yeah. And what did your dad do?
He was a dentist also.
He was?
Yeah,
Okay.
he was second dentist in Whitefish Bay.
Okay. And then you became a dentist.
Right.
And where did you practice?
Grafton,
Okay.
just south of Port Washington.
You know, how many years did you...
45 years. I came up here every weekend from Memorial Day to Labor Day. And in fact, I wore out cars. One car salesman said, "Do you work on teeth or sell teeth?" I'd come up on a Thursday afternoon and go back on a Sunday for 45 years. I never missed a weekend. And then naturally on the holidays, I'd stay a week, you know. 4th of July and Memorial Day and Labor Day, because you had to get the work done.
Did you ever think about practicing up here?
I did. I thought about it. And then there was the Butler brothers came in, and a couple other dentists came in, and I thought, well, that's probably enough. And then my mother didn't want to leave Milwaukee, and she was getting elderly and whatever. So, you know, family draws you back to the original area.
Of course, yes. You've got some pictures here. Can you tell me some things about these pictures? We've got some pictures right here. And this
on the bottom there is Claire and Walter.
Okay.
They must have stopped at a friend's house in Arizona. And that's a picture I took of a shoreline. It was German landscaping.
Okay.
German forestry.
Well, tell me about that.
They cleaned up everything. I mean, the grass was cut, the weeds were cut, trees were trimmed. It was German forestry. And then everybody back then had postcards.
Yes.
And the little one's a postcard. You know, part of their advertising deal. And you can see all the piers were the same. And he was big on wren houses.
Oh, okay.
He always had his wren houses, and each house had a wren house. And Clara used to inspect them, that they were cleaned out and painted every year, that every house took care of their wren houses, and those houses got to be like her children. And once they were sold, she'd come over, and every remodeling project, she'd kind of okay it and tell Walter, start yelling at her in German, you sold them. They're not yours anymore. you know. So, but they were like their children. I mean, they built them by themselves, so they had a vested interest in them.
Very nice. And then here's some more pictures. Tell me about these pictures.
Like I said before, he used to bring back these, over 50-inch muskies, couple every year, ring the bell when he'd get them.
Is that him?
That's him right there in the back of his truck.
Wow.
There was his truck that I used to drive around in.
And who's the little boy in front?
That's a cousin, second cousin of mine that came up visiting, and I must have taken his picture by the truck. And the older gentleman here was, he was head of Godfrey Foods, IGA.
Oh, okay.
And he had a cottage on Crab Lake, and Walter always promised him an over 50-inch muskie that he could mount and put in his house over on Crab Lake. And so that was him coming over to look at the muskie that Walter was going to give him, and he was going to have stuffed.
And what was, you know his name?
I don't.
Okay.
His last name might have been Godfrey because it was Godfrey Foods.
Yeah.
And it became IGA,
Okay.
you know.
And then we have these pictures, and it looks like we have Martin houses.
That's it, Martin. What did I say?
You said Reds.
Yeah, they were Martin houses, Martin apartments.
Martin Apartments.
And they were on a scissors, and they came down so you
so
could clean
you
them
could
out.
clean them out.
And they were bad tenants. They were,
Messy?
oh, jeez. They didn't take care of their apartments every year. It was a mess to clean them. And like I said before, Clara would come down and inspect it. And a friend of mine, Bob Stowers, we took it apart one day, and we taped it, and we striped it, and we painted it white, and we did artistic because he's an artist. And Clara came down and she said, "I want to see what you boys are doing." And she says, "My God, that's beautiful." She turned around and walked away.
So do you still have a Martin house?
No, they deteriorated so bad that everybody took them down. I don't think
Okay.
any left. Now there's one of her four-season homes, the last one to be sold, and that's her dahlia bed. She had a big bed of
Dahlias.
dinner plate dahlias.
Wow.
And whatever, and a friend and I would come up here, and naturally in our early days we hit all the bars at night, the Boulder Beer Bar and everything like that. She had a speed bump by her bedroom when you drive down the driveway, and I think she knew if a tenant was leaving or coming back, and she'd come out and say, "Oh, you boys got home a little late last night, didn't you?" And she'd want to know where we went, but she never would, condemn anything or whatever. But she was a character.
Well, being German, they probably drank their beer too, right?
Right. So
tell me about being a teenager up here in the summer and where you went.
well, it was everybody went to the Boulder Beer Bar. That was over 18 or over, and then they'd go down. What's that highway now? Where you go over to 51 to the Broken Knuckle.
Yes. H.
Yeah. And you'd go over to Broken Knuckle, and then after you turn 21 from the Broken Knuckle, you go to Butch Thiessen's Twin Pine Resort.
I had that same experience.
And if Butch had a good crowd in there,
Yes.
he didn't close. He closed at daybreak.
Yeah. I remember him pulling the shades down at closing time and turning the lights out and
Right.
on the front. Yeah.
Yeah, right. And then I think he's still around. He moved to Venice, Florida, I think.
That's what I understand. Yes.
And he moved his mother down there, and she was a fantastic woman.
She was very.
Very, very friendly.
Another German family.
Yeah, very friendly. And I think his sister was down there. I think he had a sister. But I haven't seen him in years.
Now, as far as Rest Lake, you were telling me that as a kid you went to Red Feather Lodge. Can you you describe that place for us?
I didn't really know that place. I didn't really know anybody that stayed there, but I remember they had a boathouse with a bar above it. And a friend and I, we went in there a couple times underage, of course, but that was a big hangout for everybody to take their boat over there. And
go by boat to go to the
older
bar.
people, they'd all go to that bar. Then it finally burnt down.
Do you remember about what year that might have been?
No, it had to be oh God, around late 60s,
Okay.
early 70s
All
maybe.
right. All right.
It burnt.
And you said Mrs. Meinel was a gardener. I mean, she had beautiful
Yeah,
flowers.
yeah. She had, like I said before, the whole place was trimmed up, German forestry and everything like that. She had the flowers and those people all over this area, they knew what would work was. It was astonishing what they how hard they worked and how they'd made everything from scratch. Like these cabins, every one of them had in the bathroom purple plastic tile with black trim. And my mother said to her once, "Where in the heck did you get that?" And she said, "When we built these places, everything was rationed, World War II and whatever." And one of the guests came up and he sold plastic tile, and that's the only tile he couldn't sell, and he had boxes of it, so we got it for free and used it. They used everything.
Yeah.
They used everything, and that's how everybody had that purple tile, who eventually we all took it out.
So World War II
Yeah.
created purple tile, and
And
it's
they
like,
got things from their customers. Like one of their customers was Jacob Lawnmower Company,
oh, Jacobson.
Jacobson, and they brought up free lawnmowers for him. And whatever, I mean, that's the way they operate. Everybody became friends. If you came up enough.
So the Jacobsons family
Right.
stayed there. Any other people you knew that were?
No, they were
common
sold
repeat?
off one by one. The first one that bought the kind of the boarding house lodge type. The Bain house was the Berglunds bought that, and then they built that place over by the Finlanders.
Okay.
And then the second one was Ergman's. And then Grace and Otto Newman bought the second one. My mother bought the honeymoon cabin. And
Do you remember the original names of the cabins? Besides the honeymoon
No,
cabin?
no.
Just the honeymoon cabin.
And then Bill and Bill Garris bought the last one.
Okay.
And he was one of the charter members of the Lions Club.
Okay. So are those families still owning some of that
No,
property?
no,
They're
they're all gone.
They're all gone.
All gone. Those places have been sold 2-3 times.
Okay.
And all extensively remodeled.
Okay.
But the basic footprint is still there.
Okay. And you said Walter built everything. What was the construction good?
Yes, and they made everything work. Like when I remodeled my place, and we found instead of 1 2x4, he might have taken 3 2x4s and put them together to make one big one. I mean, they didn't waste anything.
Right.
Didn't waste anything, and it was all made. They were all, and the German engineering. If one nail was good, 5 were better. Because I remember the person who took my place apart go like, "My God, what did this guy have, a monopoly on nails? One nail would have done it. He put in 3 or 4. They knew how to build.
So it sounds like they were completely self-sufficient. Pretty much.
I think pretty much so. I mean, and then other people
bartering and trading and.
They had, there'd be a Mason, Benson, and Baseman was another Mason, and they all worked together,
So were there fireplaces in these cabins?
Yes,
Each one of them had a fireplace.
central heating, a regular home.
And they were fieldstone fireplaces or brick?
Most of them were brick.
Okay.
Most of them were brick, but it was amazing for that time, because most people only came up here Memorial Day to Labor Day. I mean, back in the 60s, who would come up here in the winter? Memorial Day to Labor Day, that was the season.
Yeah.
And building 4-season homes with basements, I think was almost unheard of. And then he put them on separate lots, 100-foot government lots
Yeah.
down the shore.
So he must have been planning that
Just
was his
subdivided.
retirement.
Yeah.
Yep.
And then
Sounds
he
like
had a driveway going into his newer place, and then there was a asphalt driveway that went in the back of all three cabins, so they could go and take the garbage and clean them out and whatever.
yeah.
And then when they were sold, they were eventually, that was taken up, and everybody had their own driveway.
Now, how about your mom? What did she do during the summer while you all were spending time there?
She stayed up there.
Did
Yeah.
she enjoy
Oh yeah, she
the Northwoods? Was she
yeah,
a fisherman too?
No,
No.
no. But she loved going around, talking to the neighbors, talking to Clara. They'd go out for lunch, whatever, and it was basically my mother's entertainment, especially after my father died. You know?
So you'd go back to Whitefish Bay, do your high school and grade
Right,
school.
we'd come up for like 3 weeks, then we'd go home for a week.
Okay.
Then come back up for 3 weeks, and then school started. Well, then the place was closed down, and we didn't come back up until after school. You know,
Did Walter help your mom take care of it in the winter and check on it?
He did all the leaf raking and all that. Because my mother's place was in his front lawn, basically.
Yeah.
So he took care of all the leaves and everything like that, and then he showed me how to drain the water and everything. Everybody took possession of a place when they bought it on Labor Day,
Okay.
because they might have sold it to you during the summer, but they had renters until Labor Day.
That one more summer of
So
income.
in 1963, we came up the weekend after Labor Day and took possession of it, and then he winterized it, and he showed me how to do it, and I've done it for over 50 years.
Great.
Yeah. And his other place, I never did, I bought it in 79 and never did close it down. But when he went to Mexico, he used to close that down, drain it.
Did they ever talk about their Mexican experience?
They had a lot of friends down there. They went down there for years, and like I said before, he was into duck hunting, Mexican wood ducks. I got pictures of him with a string of ducks, and that was how he entertained himself down there, was duck hunting. And I think he did some fishing, but duck hunting was the main thing. So I do not know that much about Mazatlan. I've never been there, but I think they stayed in an apartment, and then they went from there.
But so they left in the winter too. They didn't stay in the.
They drove their truck down there with all their supplies and everything else.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Let's see. Now, what kind of rowboats did he have? Do you remember the boat?
Lumacraft.
Alumacraft. So he had
Almost.
aluminum boats.
Yeah, almost. Well, originally they had guide boats, wooden. In fact, he had his wooden guide boat till the day he died. I don't know what happened to it, but all the cabins came with an Alumacraft, 14-foot Alumacraft Model A, which was called the Resorter.
The Resorter. Okay.
Yeah.
And what size motors, or did you have to bring your own motor?
Well, I had a motor, 5-horse, but that's what most people use, just the rowboat, 5-10 horsepower motor. Like I said before, it was unheard of. Couple runabouts around the chain with an 80 horsepower. That was the big boat,
Yep.
like an old wooden Thompson or something like that. That was
Right.
That was the big deal. If
Like my
anybody
brother
those.
had a Dumphy
Yeah.
that he bought with his paper route money in Wauwatosa, and then he had a 35 Johnson, and he thought that was the biggest motor that.
Right. Yeah, it was a fishing era then.
Yeah.
Everybody
Yeah.
fished, and nobody ever thought about any bigger boats or whatever.
Right.
You
As a matter of fact, there was a little bit of controversy. The more ski boats that went out, it was kind of hard on the fishermen.
Right, there was always a conflict between the fishing and once more and more runabouts came about, and that's one of the reasons they still have a law that cut water skiing out at 7 o'clock, because they wanted the fishermen to have a chance to
To fish in
fish.
peace.
Yeah, fish in peace, I guess.
So are you an avid fisherman to this day? Or?
Not so much anymore. Not so much anymore. I guess when it slowly got worse and worse and worse and worse, my patience gave out.
So you saw a big change in fishing from when you were a kid
Oh, yeah. Oh,
to
yeah.
now, as far as the number
yeah.
of fish that are around.
Big entertainment now is to take boat rides,
Mm-hmm.
especially with your pontoon boat. That's, I think, the biggest entertainment during the summer
Right.
is boat trips,
Yep.
with your friends.
Right. Right.
And stopping at the marina at the Tiki Bar. It's gotten popular in the last few years.
Yes. Yeah. Is there anything else you can tell us about Walter and Claire that you remember as far as who they were, their lifestyle, their
Basically, they passed away, I think, 71, and I think she died about 5 years later.
uh-huh.
And other than that, no.
But you could say something about their contribution to this part of the world, coming
Well,
from
he was-
Germany and making their own life.
Walter and Clara were part of the resort people who came in after the timber barons and developed the whole area. I mean, you can name the families in Manitowish Waters by, like I said before, everybody should read Ruthie's book. But the Vosses, the Klarczyks, the Wanetkas, the Meinels, you can go all the way down the list. They all worked hard. They all developed the area.
Yeah.
And all the resorts were eventually pretty much subdivided,
Right. And I guess as a
Camping took over. Camping kind of, I think, in my opinion, more or less killed the resorts when everybody got into camping with the tents and trailers and everything like that. That kind of killed the resorts.
you think that affected it?
That
huh?
affected the resorts. And then as they got older, who wanted to work that hard? Who would buy these resorts? And so that's when I think they got more and more into subdividing them.
And I always thought about once you came up here and stayed at a resort and it got in your blood, just like your family,
Yeah.
you wanted to buy your own place.
Right, especially when they started to be sold.
Right.
Yeah.
And you happened to enjoy resorting before,
Yeah,
but then ended up buying an example of a resort cabin.
Right,
Only
right.
yours was a little fancier than most of them, it sounds like, with the basement and...
the one I bought in '79, the one my mother bought was that was the old Finlander's place, tar paper shack, which
Okay.
Walter extensively remodeled, but that was only one, what they used to call 3-season.
Okay, so that was a 3-season
Yeah.
cabin. Not the ones of, not his basement house.
No,
Houses, yeah. Okay. Well, that sounds really interesting.
yeah,
So, I hope that you and I can take a little ride and see the places, and I can take some
yeah.
modern
more.
pictures.
Yeah, there's some that they're pretty close. I mean, everybody's remodeled. I mean, it's
Right.
Vilas County every summer. You did some kind of remodeling, big or small. That's used to call it Vilas County construction. most older homes are add-ons.
Yeah, a good place for Hanson's Hardware, right?
Right,
In
right.
Polk.
Yeah, I remember them well.
Yep.
Yeah.
What do you remember about the Hansons?
Great people, great people. In fact, I just saw Ralph's wife the other day up in Mercer buying
Jan?
flowers, Jan, and we talked for a while. And you could go in there and you'd say something was broken, and he'd show you how to fix it.
Ralph?
Ralph, I remember I wanted to buy new innards for a toilet.
Uh-huh.
And he looked at me and said, Schafer, you don't need a new innards here. You just need this part. Get this part. You put it in here, and you put it this way, and that's how you fix it. And that's the way he was. He was, again, a friend,
Uh-huh.
And I remember True Value Tool of the Month. I used to kid him that I had the complete collection.
Well, tell us about Tool of the Month. I don't know about that.
There was a special tool or object that was at a price for the month. It was almost like a giveaway.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
So you got your whole tech, or your whole
Well,
toolbox?
but sometimes it'd be a little cooler or a screwdriver or something. It was. I think it was a promotion from True Value.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
But they were great people.
Very, very good people.
Yeah, like I said before, always helpful.
Uh-huh.
The Dietz family, same thing. They're right on Wahoo Road. The back end of Dietz Station is Wahoo Road. Also great people, always a good neighbor. You needed help or my mother needed help, he was right there, or his wife was right there, Carol.
Carol and Bob Dietz.
Right, and the son is the same way, Bill. Always a good neighbor, you know.
Well, I think that says a lot about this community, doesn't it?
Right, right.
I think. Do you think about Whitefish Bay as much as you think about being in Manitowish Waters?
Well, I grew up in Whitefish Bay. I like Whitefish Bay. I mean, it was a great place to grow up. But the school system is still number 1 or 2 in the state.
Right.
And we used to call it Beaver Cleaver Country. It reminded us of that TV show.
Right.
You know, and it was a great place to grow up, and this was a great place to come and have fun, you know, and retire,
Yes.
you know.
So is there anything else you can add?
Guess not.
Well, thank you.
Probably talked too much already.
No, this is a wonderful interview. We got
Yeah.
lots of information. And that's what's so great about finding, because these stories are going to be lost
Yeah,
if we don't record them.
correct.
So
Correct.
thank you very much, Delp.
Yeah, thank you.